In this video we're going to practice hard surface modeling, and we're going to do this Victorian type window. I have prepared a Cinema 4D file where the reference images are already set up, and we have a front view here and a sectional view which I've put in the right view over here. We're going to do this object with only 4 parts. The first and most complicated one will be the stone frame on the outside, and then we have this ornament up here which will be a separate object, and we have the window frame and the glass. This window is a little bit tricky because, for one thing, the reference images are not exactly perfect, which is something that we have to live with. You will hardly ever find reference images that are totally accurate. So on this front view, for example, I've set it up so it's symmetrical down here, and you can see here at the top we're off a little bit. So that means we have to improvise a bit as we go along. This window is also tricky because we have these round parts here. So we have something like a half pipe coming up this object and turning into this arch. And I think the key to modeling this object is this surface down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with this surface down here, and then we're going to use poly by poly modeling to create the rest of the geometry. So let's get started. I'm going to add a plane object to the scene, and we don't need any width or height segments for this. Let's change the orientation to -z. I'm going to make this editable and then use axis center to put the axis at the bottom of this object. Let's move it up and line it up with this windowsill here. Let's make it a bit wider, maybe something like this. And in the right view I'm going to move this over to about here and then rotate it around like so. And I'm going to scale it just on the y-axis to about here. Now let's go back to the front view. Just going to reset the axis to 0. Let's go to edge mode, and I'll make this reference image a little bit more transparent. So let's select these edges on the left and on the right, and I'm going to use connect points edges to create an additional edge here. Let's select this top edge, and I'm going to scale this. Let's switch off enable axis to about here, and now we can select this edge and use the bevel tool. We're going to chamfer this edge with a couple of subdivisions. I'll do 5 for this one. We're also going to limit the bevel tool so we can stop the bevel at the top and bottom edges here, and now we can change the offset all the way to the top and to the bottom, something like this. So let's deselect everything. I'm going to optimize the object to weld the points at the corners here, and let's ring select these edges, use connect points edges to create an edge loop at the center, and now we can delete these points over here. And next I'm going to extrude this edge down a bit. I'm hitting W on the keyboard to switch to the world coordinate system. And let's quick extrude this down to about here. And next I'm going to extrude this edge over to about here. And let's extrude this edge down to here. And I'm going to move this over in the right view, and I think I'm also going to make this image a little more transparent. So let's adjust the position of this edge, and I want these surfaces here to be parallel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a guide, and we have to use snapping here. So let's go ahead and switch on snapping. So we can snap the guide to the surface, to one of the surfaces, and we also need guide snap here so we can snap the points or edges to the guide that we're going to create. So in this case I'm going to create the guide that goes from the top of this surface to this corner here, switch to the move tool, and then snap this guide to this point here. Let's select our plane, zoom in on this area here, and now we can snap the edges to that guide, and we have two parallel surfaces now. Let's switch off snapping again. I'm going to hide this guide for now. Next I'm going to extrude this edge over, move it to 0 on the x-axis, deselect everything and optimize the object, and let's go ahead and move this point here over, and I'm going to make it parallel to this edge here, and we can weld these points and dissolve this edge here, and we can also delete these edges. So let's select this edge and extrude it down all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to extrude this edge over, and I'm going to overshoot this a bit, so we need the distance between this edge in the image and our edge here on the object, so we have to move all of these edges over a little bit further. So let's have a look at what we have now. Let's change the Phong angle to 22, and I'm also going to add a bit of ambient occlusion, so we're getting some contact shadows and we can see the details a little better. Okay, so now I'm going to select all of these edges here, and let's extrude these up and scale them down to 0. Let's move these up a bit further. I'm going to use the line cut tool, and maybe let's switch off visible only here, and I'm going to continue this edge straight across like so. And I'm going to move these edges up to about here. Now because we have this cut out here, we're going to need an additional edge loop here, so I'm going to select these edges and connect them, and down here I'm going to create a bit of a ledge. It's not in the image, but I think it's going to look nice and add a little bit more detail if we do that. So I'm going to ring select these edges down here and connect them as well, and then we can select this polygon here and extrude it out a little bit, and let's move this edge down. Let's switch on our guide here, switch on snapping, and I'm going to select these 2 points, snap them to the guide, and let's move this guide and snap it to this point here. And now we can snap these points down here to the guide as well. Next we're going to extrude these edges back to about here, and let's make another cut like so, and I'm going to deselect this edge down here and extrude these edges back. Let's make another cut up here, and I'm going to move these points up a bit, something like this. Go back to edge mode, deselect this edge down here and extrude this one back. Let's move this point up a bit, go back to edge mode and extrude this edge back quite a bit. I'll do maybe 150 centimeters here. I'm going to create another guide, switch on snapping, and going to snap this guide to these 2 points of this surface here, and then we can snap the guide to, let's snap it to this point. select our plane, and I'm going to move these points here and snap them to the guide. And I'm going to copy the position on the y-axis and make sure that this point is at the same position on the y-axis. So we've got something like this now. Next I'm going to select these edges here and extrude them over a bit, move them to 0, deselect everything and optimize the object. And we do have a bit of an issue with the Phong shading here, so we can select this edge and break the Phong shading on this one. Before we continue, let's clean up the geometry a little bit. I'm going to delete this polygon down here, and I'm going to weld these 3 points to the corner, and up here I'm going to weld these points. So now we can get rid of this edge loop here. And over here what I'll do is I'll make a cut from this point over to this point. And that means we can get rid of this edge loop here, and we can also get rid of these edges. I think I'm going to move all of these points down just a little bit. Something like this. So now we can continue and create the rest of the geometry of this frame. I'm going to make a couple of extrusions here. And up here I'm going to select these 3 edges and extrude them up. And let's go ahead and make one more extrusion all the way to the top. And now we can select these 2 edges and extrude them over. I'm going to move these to about here. And let's go ahead and extrude this edge out to about here. And now we can delete this edge and this one. So we're getting something like this. And up here I'm going to use the line cut tool with an angle constraint, and the angle should be 45 degrees, so we can make a cut like this and then delete these points up here. Select these edges, extrude them over, scale them down to 0, and let's move these over to 0 on the x-axis. And I'm going to move all of these points up a little bit to about here. So next we're going to create this arch, and we can use part of the geometry that we've already created. So let's go to Polygon Mode. I'm going to select these polygons here, and let's go ahead and split these off. So this will create this new object here, and I'm going to move the object axis of this all the way to the bottom and to the left. And now we can switch on snapping and move this up and snap it to here. Next I'm going to add a bend deformer as a child of this plane object. And we have to make this object a little bit bigger. So I'm going to scale it just on the y-axis. Let's make it about this big. And changing the size of the object means we have to fit the bend deformer to the parent again. In order to get this curve, we also need more geometry on this object. So let's go to Edge Mode. I'm going to ring select these edges, and I'm going to make this fairly detailed. So I'm going to add maybe, let's try 21 segments here. And now we can select the bend deformer and change the strength and bend it over to here. And I want this point to be fairly close to the center of the grid. So let's select that plane again, switch on the scale tool. I'm just going to scale this on the y-axis, so I'm switching off the z and x-axes. And let's go back to model mode. I'm going to scale this down just a bit, trying to get close to the center line. Something like this. So we're following this curve pretty good. So now we can select current state to object here, and let's hide this object here. I'm going to keep this as a backup just in case. And what we're going to do with this one is, in point mode, I'm going to use the line cut tool, and I'm going to make a cut from this point straight up to the top. And now we can select these points here and delete them. Make sure we get everything here. And up here we can just weld these points to that top point. And now we can select both of these objects and use connect objects and delete to turn them into a single object. I'm going to deselect everything, optimize the object, and let's go ahead and weld these points. And I think we can get rid of these edges here, so I'm just going to select them and dissolve them. And over here I'm going to weld these 2 points to here. So now we can select this edge and extrude it over, scale it down to 0, switch on snapping. I'm going to snap it over to here, deselect everything, optimize the object. Let's use the line cut tool with an angle constraint of 45 degrees. Let's make a cut here, delete this point, select this edge, extrude it down, scale it to 0, and I'm going to use axis extension. So with snapping switched on and the move tool selected, hold down Control, right click on this axis here, snap it to this point, and then we're going to drag it down and snap it to this point down here. And now we can select these 2 points and weld them, and I'm going to weld these 2 points like so. So now we can use close polygon hole to close this hole up there. And let's select this polygon, extrude it back a bit. Let's do maybe -30. And we're going to remove the n-gons on this one. And down here, what I'll do is I'll just weld some of these points. So let's maybe select these ones and weld them down to this point, and the rest of them I'm going to weld to this point up here. And let's move these down a bit to maybe about here, and I'm going to move this one up a bit to about here. We don't really need these edges anymore, so we can dissolve them. And I'm going going to optimize once again just in case, and now we can use a symmetry object, and let's make this editable. Let's have a look first. It seems that everything's looking okay. I'm not going to create additional edges down here to get rid of this triangle. It's perfectly fine to have these triangles here. I don't really want to create additional geometry. It's one thing we could do, but it's not really necessary here. So I'm going to keep the object like this. We have good clean geometry, so everything's fine. Let's break this down into real geometry and go to edge mode. And I'm going to delete this edge loop. The last thing I want to do is add some depth to this outer part of the frame. So let's use the loop selection tool. We're going to select boundary loop, select these edges here, and I'm going to use quick extrude to extrude these back. Maybe let's do 30 centimeters. Okay, so that's looking good, and this is our finished stone frame. Next we're going to create this top ornament here. I'm going to make the stone frame invisible for now, and the way we're going to do this top ornament is we're going to start with a spline. So let's grab the spline pen tool, switch it to linear, and I'm only going to create one point about here. Then switch back to the move tool, go to point mode. The point should still be selected, and whenever I draw straight lines I use quick extrude to create additional points. The reason for that is because that is one easy way to line up points without using guide snapping or having to line up points manually. So I can quick extrude these points and I don't have to worry about these points lined up on the y-axis or these points lined up on the x-axis, for example. So in this case we're going to extrude this point down, then move it over a bit, extrude, extrude again, move this point over, and extrude over, extrude down, move this point over, and that's all we need. So maybe let's move these ones over a little bit, and let's move all of these ones up a little bit, something like this. Now in order to get parallel lines here, I'm going to use another guide. So switch on snapping, grab the guide tool, and I'm going to snap the guide to these 2 points here, like so. And then we can move it and snap it to this point here, select the spline, and let's move this point over. Let's grab the guide and snap it to this point, select the spline, select this point and snap it to the guide. So let's hide this and let's go back to model mode, and I'm going to use axis center here to move the axis all the way to the top and to the right of this spline. Let's rotate it 90 degrees or minus 90 degrees, and I'm going to reset the axis to 0, and let's put this in an extrude object. We don't want any movement on the z-axis, but we want this movement on the x-axis instead. So let's extrude this out a little bit, something like this. And we can make this editable right away. And let's change the Phong angle to 22. So we get something like this. I'm going to use Axis Center again. Let's reset and just put it to the top of the object. So I'm going to move this over on the x-axis. And let's go ahead and move this up to about here. Let's go to Edge Mode, extrude this edge up a bit. Let's go to our right view. Move this over to maybe about here. Select this point or these points and try to make these parallel to this line here. And I'm going to create another edge loop right at the center. Let's delete this part here, go back to Edge Mode, and now we can move these edges over to about here. Let's use the line cut tool again with the angle constraint switched on. So I'm going to make a 45-degree cut here, and let's delete these points. Maybe move these ones over a bit further. Select the edges, extrude them down, scale them to 0. Move them down to about here. And let's make another 45-degree cut. Delete the points down here. Select these edges, extrude them over, scale them down, and move them over a bit further to about here. In order to create these slanted surfaces, we need to make a couple more cuts, and we also have this cutout here. So we're going to have to add a couple more edges. So let's switch back to the line cut tool, and maybe let's switch off angle constraint and just eyeball this. So we're going to make a cut like this, and then let's make a cut down like this, and I'm going to make another cut. Yeah, well, we should keep this parallel to the other edge, so it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. So something like this. And we might need more edges up here, so I'm going to create another cut over here. And now what we can do is get rid of some of these points here. So I'm going to delete these ones. And in order to get the cutout, we're going to delete this polygon here. And we can get rid of this edge. Let's go ahead and select these two edges here. I'm going to extrude these back a bit. Actually, before I do, let's undo this. I also want to create a ledge at the top. So I'm going to select these edges here and extrude these back a bit. So now we can select these two edges here, extrude them back. Let's go to point mode and select these points and weld them to this point. And let's weld these 2 points together. I'm going to move this one over to the back. Let's go back to edge mode. Select these 3 edges here and extrude those back a bit. And I'm going to use the Polygon pen tool to create another polygon here. And let's clean up the geometry a little bit. So we can weld these points together, dissolve this edge, and dissolve this entire edge loop here. And down here we can weld these points and these ones, and then just extrude this edge back. And in the top view I'm going to select all the points at the back here, and just scale them down to 0. Optimize the object. We should have grabbed the entire points all the way over to the center of the object. For some reason I didn't do that. So let's go ahead and also select these points here. Let's scale them down and move these back a bit further. So something like this. Let's switch on our stone frame, and this is our ornament. So maybe I'll move this back a bit further into the frame, and let's add a symmetry object. And we have something like this. So I think that's looking pretty good. Maybe we can move these points over a little bit further to the edge of the stone frame. And I'm going to make the symmetry object editable. Let's get rid of these tags, and we can now dissolve these edges here. So that's the stone frame and the ornament finished. Next we're going to create the window frame, and first of all I'm going to select this edge and break the Feng shading. Okay. Now, in order to create the window frame and the glass, we can use the geometry that we already have. So let's go to Polygon Mode and do a loop selection. Select these polygons here, and I'm going to split them off into a new object, which will be the window frame. Let's go to solo mode, and on this one we can dissolve these edges here. Let's go to model mode, use axis center. I'm going to reset it and place the axis at the center of the object, and let's change the depth to something like 50 maybe. Let's go to polygon mode, select all the polygons, use D for extrude, and I'm going to extrude these down to about here. So let's do maybe 24 centimeters. Doesn't have to be exact. Oh, that's a bit too much. So let's try that again. I think something may be wrong up here. So let's go to point mode, deselect everything and optimize. I didn't do anything, but apparently we have a bit of an issue up here. So let's go ahead and select these points, and I'm going to scale these down to 0 on the x-axis, optimize the object, and let's go ahead and check the stone frame in this area. So switch off solo. Yeah, we have a similar issue up here. So let's select all of these points at the center, and we're just going to set these to 0 and optimize, and that should fix this issue here. So let's select the window frame again. I'm going to go to solo mode again. And now we should be able to extrude these polygons. Okay, so let's do 24 like before. And we also have this crossbar here. So what I'll do is I'll use the line cut tool, and I'm going to make a cut over here, and let's add another cut here. I'm going to move these edges up a little bit, go back to polygon mode, select these two polygons here, hit B for the bridge tool, and I'm going to bridge these polygons to create this part of the object. So the last thing we have to do is create the glass, and we're going to use our window frame as a basis. So let's grab the loop selection tool and select these polygons. I'm going to split them off, and this is going to be our glass. And I'm going to turn this geometry into connected geometry. So let's select these edges here and just delete them. And we can then select these points, scale them down to 0, optimize the object, and let's turn this into an edge selection and dissolve these edges. In model mode, I'm going to center the axis on this glass, and let's change the depth to maybe 25. Let's go to polygon mode and use close polygon hole to add the polygons at the front and the back. And let's get rid of these n-gons here. I'm going to use the line cut tool. You can see we have 2 points that are very close to the tip here. We don't really need these, so let's go ahead and delete those. And I'm going to use the knife tool to create a cut straight down the center. And we're going to create another cut down here. And next I'm going to select these polygons here. Now let's select all of them and reverse the normals. And we have a hole up here, so let's use close polygon hole and close this hole. Let's select this n-gon and remove the n-gons. And I'm also going to remove the n-gons on these 2 polygons, but not like that. Let's go back a step, just select one of these. So I've just optimized the object. Let's see if this works now. So that's a lot better. And we're going to do the same at the back here. So remove the n-gons. Let's switch off solo mode. And I'm going to select the glass and the window frame, switch to model mode, and let's move these over to the front a bit, maybe to about here. I'm going to create 2 simple materials. One is a simple white that I'm going to put on the stone frame and the ornament and the glass, and the other one I'm going to make a little bit darker and put it on the window frame just to get a little bit of contrast. And what we could also do is go to the render settings. I'm going to add the cell renderer here, switch on color and edges, and now we can do a wireframe render of the window. So you can see we have pretty nice and clean geometry, and the object is looking really beautiful. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you again soon.